Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming, and particularly when it's so cold. That's why we decided teas and coffees were the order today. Normally, as you know, we do refreshments at the end, but we definitely, I think, have made the right decision. Now, Jamie, I've just spoken to Jamie. If you go onto YouTube and go to the Avon Valley Church's YouTube page, if you want to see them again, they're there. And hopefully there are things that we can share with other people. Share them on your Facebook page and things like that. Just be good for as many people who would like to see them to be able to see them. We are doing a lot of big questions, as you know, and I hope they are of interest to you and value to you. The thinking behind them, as you know, was that firstly, I thought the people who don't come to church are asking these questions. But then as I started chatting around church, loads of people at church, many of you here, said, well, actually, we've got exactly those same questions. So my prayer is that these talks are helpful to everybody, not just to everybody, and I think they are. I think we all have these questions, don't we, about life. Does science disprove Christianity? If God is a God of love, why is there suffering, which we looked at last week? And today, as you can see, is this it? Is death the end, or is there anything after death? Which is a real great question. So we'll start thinking about that as you enjoy your tea together. So, some of you will recognise this. Anyone know where that is? Burley, that's right. I find it absolutely fascinating in this secular and supposedly unbelieving age that actually spiritual and religious beliefs are thriving. As you know, in Burley, if you go to Burley, there's half a dozen of these shops, aren't there, that sell all this sort of stuff, all these sort of, I'm going to call it religious paraphernalia, whether that's the right phrase, I don't know. Books, artifacts, tarot cards, healing crystals, every imaginable kind of spiritual stuff, except, of course, for Christian stuff, interestingly enough. But I find it fascinating. Because, you see, I was born in 1959. If you do the maths, you can work out I'm 32. I was born in 1959, and the prevailing mood in the 60s and 70s as I grew up was really that Christianity was gradually being disproved. It was the age of rationalism, wasn't it? Science was disproving everything, logic was disproving everything, and many people believed that a time would come when all of this religious nonsense, as the secular world saw it, would disprove Christianity. And indeed, there were even those who, as I'm sure you know, proclaimed that God is dead, by which they meant that God is no longer needed. He's been disproved. And the result, interestingly, was... here was the sort of God is dead Nietzsche thing, who was the philosopher who said it. But interestingly, of course, we know that, of course, that's not the case. But the church responded to that with sort of rational arguments for the existence of God. This was one such book by Anderson, The Evidence for the Resurrection. And it's a good book, actually, by the way, just so as you know. But it was a sign of the age that the church responded to the rationalism of that age by trying to give rational arguments for why you can believe in Christianity. Looking at the evidence for the resurrection, the evidence, that they were eyewitnesses, that you could actually see that the stuff that you read in the Gospels fits in with the Roman practice of the age and so forth, like that. And there's all sorts of evidence that you can have for the resurrection. So it was using rationalist thought to respond to rationalist claims that Christianity was disproved. And I think they were right to do so. It was the age that we lived in, and you had to do that. But people in the church tried this. They tried the rationalist argument. Others in the church tried a different argument. They tried what I would call the liberal argument. The liberal argument was, instead of being rationalist and saying we can give a good argument for the resurrection, we can give a good argument for the existence of God, we can give it a good argument for why Jesus is God, the liberal argument was, what we'll do is we'll strip away everything that rationalism doesn't can't cope with. So, for example, they denied the miracles of Jesus. Jesus didn't walk on water, he walked on a sandbank, something like that. So generally. Jesus didn't feed 5,000 people from a few loaves and fishes, but miraculously, in quotes, 5,000 people shared their packed lunches and so forth. That's the sort of thing that happened, wasn't it? I'm not making this to disparage people, I'm just saying this is what happened. And even more importantly, from a Christian point of view, Jesus didn't rise from the dead physically, but he was spiritually alive in the disciples' hearts. That was the sort of way that things were dealt with, wasn't it? That's the other response. If rationalism says we're gradually disproving Christianity, you had two choices. Either fight back rationally and say here's some rational arguments for Christianity, or you start saying, yeah, rationalism's got a point, let's take out anything that seems irrational and see what is left. The trouble is you don't end up with much left. And again, I'm not saying that in a rude way, I'm just being honest. You end up with, if Jesus wasn't the Son of God, if he didn't rise from the dead and there were no miracles, no feeding of the 5,000, you end up with that there may be a spiritual being called God and we should love one another. And that, honestly, that is where liberalism, if you follow it to its extremes, ends up. And I have to say I don't find that satisfactory. But anyway, that's in a way by the by. One of the high priests of this, if I can say that, does anyone know who that was? Thank you. The Bishop of Durham, David Jenkins, who famously said about the resurrection that he didn't believe that God did conjuring tricks with bones. And there was, in the 70s and 80s, there were a number of bishops, Spong and others from America, who delighted in denouncing conservative Christianity, if I can put it that way, and saying radical things. There was no resurrection, there was no incarnation. And they'd say it always at Easter, at Christmas, by the way, wouldn't they? You know? Am I the only one who remembers this? I remember it. Yeah. Anyway, so there it is. And basically what they're doing is they're trying to apply rational arguments to Christianity by removing the supernatural and seeing what is left. But we don't live in that age, interesting enough. As Burley, coming back to Burley, tells us. We don't now live in a primarily rational age, we live in a postmodern age. And it's quite interesting, the age that we live in. Postmodernism is, I have my truth and you have yours. I can believe whatever I want and you can believe what you want, and we can both believe that we're right and it's okay. Now that's generally the age that we live in. My truth can be different from your truth, and they doubt absolute truth. And so we experience a strange paradox in the world today as Christians, where the same people who will sort of deride us as Christians for believing in Jesus will then walk off to Burley and buy tarot cards and healing crystals and not see that if rationalism disproves Christianity, it also disproves all that as well, doesn't it? There's a strange paradox in our world today, which I find actually quite fascinating. It's sort of a spiritual mix of spirituality, where you can take a little bit of this and a little bit of that and a little bit of this and a little bit of rationalism. It doesn't matter that they don't add up, because there is no absolute truth. This was brought home to me a little while ago when a much-loved family member said to me, I don't believe in God, but just a minute or two later said, if you do what is right, then the universe will always pay you back. Now that's a common view, by the way, today. Okay? But just to be clear, he didn't mean obviously the physical universe, because obviously that's ridiculous. But he had some sense that he was attaching personhood and the ability and spiritual power to the universe. It's interesting, isn't it? Now, if you follow that to its theological conclusion, he's talking about some sort of God, isn't he? Actually. But that's the world we live in. People say that they are spiritual but not religious, don't they? And that's the sort of thing they mean. They're quite happy to go for healing crystals and things like that. But Christianity and organised religion they will reject, and then they'll go and buy their tarot cards and so forth. Why am I talking about this? I'm talking about this because What happened, I think, in the 60s and 70s and perhaps the early 80s when rationalism held sway was that people found that it didn't satisfy. People found that they were still spiritually hungry. There's a verse in the Bible, Ecclesiastes 3:11, that says this: God has set eternity in the human heart. It's Ecclesiastes 3:11 for those of you who are taking notes. And I think it's true. God has written in us a desire and a belief that there is more to life than this. And so rationalism was all very well, but it didn't really satisfy. And everybody knew, we all know that there's more to life than this. But what I would say is the challenge to rationalism is what I've called the offence of death. You see, people are either rationalistic, oh, it's all been disproved, or they'll believe in their tarot cards or whatever, but when they face death, or when the death of a loved one is imminent, suddenly people start saying, well, hold on, there must be something more to life than this. And I think that's what we see in the world today. Rationalism had its place, and of course, by the way, rationalism has some wonderful benefits for us, medicine, science, technology, and so forth, but it doesn't answer the deep question that is on everyone's heart. What happens when I die? Is there anything after this? And perhaps more pertinently for many people, what happens when that person that I love dies? That's actually the hardest thing for people to accept, isn't it? And so the reality is that rationalism doesn't satisfy because God has written eternity on our heart, and we know in our knower, if I can put it that way, that there must be something more than this. So when the death of a loved one comes, or the possibility of your own death occurs, people then start to consider the possibility that our life is more than just a weird biological fact that comes to an end. And interesting, I think the irony of this is lost on a lot of people. They happily live their lives, the people the people of Fordingbridge, let's be frank, will mostly live their lives ignoring God, possibly even mocking the existence of God, but then when death approaches, they expect this same God to roll out the red carpet and to welcome them or their loved ones into his eternal home. There's a contradiction there, isn't there? Indeed, it's interesting to discuss death with the unbeliever, which I do as a vicar all the time. Many of them find the idea of death scary and uncomfortable. And once again, I spoke to a family member not that long ago who said exactly that they could not cope with the thought of death and the thought of them not existing. Not a Christian. So this is the reality, I think, for many people. And again, it reminds me of that verse in Ecclesiastes, which says that God has made everything beautiful in its time. He has also set eternity in the human heart. And I think that what that Bible verse says is true. God has written eternity and belief that there is something more into our hearts. People may reject church, they may decry organised religion and ignore the call of Jesus Christ. But when death approaches, the words of God written upon their hearts shout out loud and clear. And they shout out, there must be something more. There must be something after we die. Now that can become really strange. A few years ago, I had to attend a humanist funeral. And I expected to find it quite awful, but in fact it was fascinating. I found it fascinating because the humanist who ran the service found it necessary again and again to allude to an afterlife that he wasn't meant to believe in. And I just found that really fascinating. Similarly, about 2 years ago, Sarah was with me. A niece of mine had a lovely humanist wedding in Scotland. You'll remember it very well. It was a lovely service. But I just found it fascinating that the humanist minister ended it with what he called a Gaelic blessing. Now, again, I'm not trying to be rude, but if there's nobody there, then who's doing the blessing? That's the honest truth, isn't it? And the point I'm making is not that it's saying this to be rude to humanists or rude to other people, but just to make the point that what we actually find is that people will say, no, this is nonsense, Luke, this is nonsense. How can you believe all this? But when the rubber hits the road, actually they know that there is something more. And I find that interesting. Most people know that there is more to life than this. Most people hope that there is something waiting for us when we die. And death is actually the offence, the thing that they cannot get past as they reflect upon that truth. And of course we see that in every religion, don't we? I'm sure you're very well aware that all religions have some sort of life after death, not necessarily heaven. Christians and Muslims would say that there is a heaven. Buddhists and Hindus would say that there's a reincarnation and an endless cycle of life after life and death after death. But they're all actually, I think, dealing with the same thing. This problem that we have when death approaches, that there must be something more. And I think what this echoes is a difficult reality, but one that we need to address, which is this: the hopelessness of life without an afterlife. I think it's worth reflecting upon this, that if there is nothing, then death actually is a very scary thing, isn't it? Not just for us, but when we come to say goodbye to the people that we love. The reality is that we find it impossible to deal with death if we truly believe, well, not impossible, we're very different if there is nothing. And you see, we live in a world that finds meaning in all sorts of things that we know as Christians, most of us I think would say here we are Christians, don't really work. Money, for example. The world says, that's life, isn't it? Have a flash car, flash holidays, a nice house, expensive trinkets, and that, by the way, can bring pleasure and enjoyment to life until death or sickness or the death of a loved one come, and then suddenly they don't help, do they? That's the truth. It's an empty thing to have all these possessions, and when you're losing somebody that you love, or when death is approaching you. The other thing that people hold on to as the meaning of life in our world today is this: it's actually family. That's actually what most people would say. The thing that gives meaning to life is family, and to a degree they're right. To have people around you who love you and care for you is a wonderful thing, and we all rejoice in it. But the trouble with that is it makes death all the more painful and difficult to deal with, doesn't it? How will I cope when the person that I love and who makes my love worth living is no longer with me? And how can I cope with the thought of not seeing them again? And again, I meet such people when I do funerals, which of course I do fairly often. These people come to church, never come to church. They ignore God and deny him. And many of them, let's be honest, have probably mocked the idea of God and church at some point in their life. But suddenly when the one they love dies, they hope that God will welcome them and receive them. And it's just fascinating. I'm not trying to be rude about them again, but it is a reality, isn't it? That people suddenly will say to me, oh, well, he or she was a good person. You know, they'll be with God now. But such thinking, to be frank, is illogical. If there is a God, then we need to address that truth and acknowledge him now, in this life, before we meet with him. Another thing that speaks to us about the existence of something after life is, in fact, the moral argument. We talked about this a little bit when we talked about science. The fact that there are unique qualities in humans that I think are not found in other animals. I think art's an interesting example. Many animals dance, for example, but they dance for a reason. to attract a mate, or even to threaten an opposing male. But humans dance and paint and sing for the sole reason of creativity and beauty. There is a difference, isn't there? But the most significant thing that separates us from other animals, I think, is morality. As people, we know that there is right and wrong, and we know that it matters. Animals are different. We may think that our cat loves us, but the truth is that if we die, then within a few days, Tiddle will quite happily have us for lunch. And most significantly, wouldn't feel the slightest guilt about it. Well, it's true, isn't it? It does happen. But if we were in similar circumstances and said, oh, well, we'll just have Grandma for lunch now, people would quite understandably think we'd lost the plot, wouldn't they? It's a very different morality. And again, the most common thing that I hear at funerals is this, oh, they'll get to heaven because they were a good person. But I think we know deep within our hearts, when we look at ourselves, that is not true, which does raise a question about the ones that we love as well, if we're honest enough to say so. Morality as a way to get to heaven is a risky thing to put our trust in. Because I know my life. Most of it's pretty good. But as I've said many times before, I'm 66 years old, and if I'd committed just one sin a day, do you know how long my list would be? 24,000. It's quite a thought, isn't it? Just one bad word, one bad thought, one lustful look, one angry word, just one a day, just one. And I've got a list of 24,000 sins that God would, well, Luke. You see, trusting in being a good person is a dangerous place to be. So if there is something, then can we really trust that we'll get there? And morality really challenges us because everybody, if you ask them, will say, oh, they'll get there because they're a good person. But does that actually work? The other thing that's interesting as we think about life after death is near-death experiences. Maybe this is something you've heard about, but I thought you might like to watch a video of a Christian man and what happened to him.
On a lonely Texas highway back in 1989, Don Piper saw two things in quick succession. First, a big rig headed straight for his car, and then the gates of heaven.
In 1989, Don Piper was instantly killed when his Ford Escort was crushed in a head-on collision. Paramedics covered his mangled body with a tarp. Then a pastor stopped and asked paramedics if he could pray for Don.
I walked over by the door, great physical damage on the outside, and I laid my hands on him and began to pray for him.
As the pastor knelt over Don's body, a sound came from beneath the tarp. Don wasn't dead. For the 10th anniversary of his book, 90 Minutes in Heaven, Don shares the vivid memories about his remarkable near-death experience.
And joining us now is a man who likes to say he's back by popular demand, Don Piper. Well, back by popular demand because of all the people that were praying for you. Don, it's good to see you. Walk us through what happened that day.
Well, I'm honored to be here, very much. Thank you. People prayed, and I lived. I was on my way to church to teach a Bible study on a Wednesday, and the 18-wheeler crossed the center stripe and hit me on this rural bridge in the middle of nowhere. And word reached my church that I had been in an accident, but not that I was a fatality, because my family had not been notified. They started praying. One of the pastors who was with the same conference with me was behind me. He came upon the accident, and God spoke to him and said, pray for the man in the red car, which was me. He got permission to get in the car, prayed for me. And as he's praying over my dead body, 90 minutes after the truck hit me and killed me, he's singing the great hymn, What a Friend We Have in Jesus, over my dead body. I've been dead an hour and a half, and suddenly, as he sings it, I start singing it with him. And he got out of the car really fast.
I bet.
He did, yeah. And told everybody I was alive.
And when I was reading in your book, they didn't really believe him at first.
No, they thought it was his imagination, because 4 paramedics had pronounced me dead.
4. And
they were waiting for the coroner, obviously, to come and take the body away. And so everyone, to say the least, was stunned by this turn of events. Then they had to figure out how to get me out of that horrific mashed car and to take me to a hospital.
Now, before you started singing with the pastor, you were in heaven. You had gone to the gates of heaven. Tell us about that.
Well, of course, there are 12 of them. There's 3 on each side of the city, the 4 walls of the city. It was magnificent. It really was a gate made of pearl. I wouldn't have believed this could happen until it happened to me.
And you think this was a real visitation?
Oh, it was.
Not something your body was just...
More real than anything I've experienced since. And when I came back, of course, I had 34 operations, was in a hospital for 13 months. That was real, but heaven's more real than that. The emotions, the feeling, the reality of being with the people who had preceded me in death.
Who was the first person that you saw and recognized?
My grandfather. I had been with him when he died. We were very, very close. I just adored him. And he died tragically of a heart attack one night, and I rode in the ambulance with him. Wow. So I was devastated when I lost him, and he was there to greet me when I died here. He was the first person I saw, and he looked good. You want to look good, heaven is where you want to be. He extended his hands to me, and he was missing fingers here on earth. And I looked down at the hands that held me when I was a little boy, and all of his fingers were there.
Wow.
And he said, in a language I've never heard before, but fully understood, "Welcome home, Donnie," which is what he called me when I was here. I knew where I was when I saw him.
And you said you saw another lady, I don't remember the relation, but in real life she didn't have teeth, but in heaven she had the most gorgeous smile you'd ever seen.
It was my great-grandmother, yes. She had osteoporosis. She was very stooped as a result of her bones having collapsed. She was a good 6 inches taller in heaven, and she smiled at me with her real smile. I'd never seen it before. She had dentures, and she didn't wear them very often.
That's amazing. Well, you talk about the music and the colors and the sounds and the love that you felt in heaven was something that you said was hard to write about in a book because there really aren't any human words to describe.
We don't have earthly words here to describe heaven. And many have taken a shot at it and done a good job of talking how glorious heaven is, but really think it's heaven. It's not here, and it's not like here. The best thing about heaven, beyond the colors and the aromas and the music and the angels and all those, is you're with God. You are with God, and we will be His people, and He will be with us forever. It's glorious.
Now, Don, it wasn't easy coming back. You spent more than 100 days in the hospital. You were in more pain than really you can even talk about, and you're still recovering. Tell us about the injuries.
Well, I had brain damage. My wife still thinks I have brain damage, and that comes in handy sometimes. I was impaled on a steering wheel, so I had massive internal injuries. The dashboard collapsed on my legs. My right leg was broken at the knee, and my left leg was severed just above the knee. I lost 4 inches of femur. It was just ejected from the car and never found. I put my arm up when the truck was coming for me, and when I did, it took the arm into the back seat, and from here forward was laying in the back seat of the car. So I was missing my left leg and missing my left arm, but I still have them.
Talking about your arm, you write about the pastor that came to pray with you, holding your hand, and how much that meant to you.
Yes.
Later on, you find out he wasn't holding your hand because, like you said, your hand was somewhere else in the car.
Yes.
Who was holding your hand, Don?
I believe it was an angel. I think God sent one to strengthen me and encourage me. I didn't know that till later, but I did know in the car I was holding onto a hand, but this hand, the right hand, was not anywhere near where a human could hold it. Wow. And so it wasn't until afterwards when I was talking to the wife of the man who prayed for me, who was an eyewitness, and I said, but I did hold the hand, and she said, of course you did. It just wasn't my husband's hand. And so then I knew that God had said, they're around us. Oh, yeah. Angels are all over the place. And so I did hold the hand of an angel, and that's where I got the strength to get through that portion of this ordeal. But then I would need many more angels in the coming days because it would take 3 years for me to walk again and
Right.
be functional.
Now, since your book came out 10 years ago, there have been so many been to heaven stories that have
Yes.
come out.
Yes.
Some have been interesting.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on those? I mean, you sort of started this ball rolling and getting people fascinated about heaven.
It would seem so. Someone said it was a renaissance of heaven, since the 90 Minutes was released 10 years ago. And of course, this book is an update on that. Many more details now
Right.
in this book about what's happened since. I think people are hungry for hope. They want to know there's a better place than this. And let's face it, when we hear the news today and we see the things that are happening in the world, we know there's got to be a better place than this. And there is. Jesus said, I go to prepare a place for you.
Yeah.
So it's a real place. And I think it was kind of like an avalanche. There were these people who have had the experiences and never really planned to talk about it, like me.
Sure.
And when I did, I think it maybe kind of freed up some of the people to do that. I think some of the stories have credibility issues, but for the most part, I've had people come up to me time and time again and extend their hand and say, I've never told anybody this before,
Wow.
but that happened to me too.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. Well, you can find out so much more of Don's story in the best-selling book, 90 Minutes in Heaven. A special 10th anniversary version of it is in stores nationwide. I was up all night reading this. Don, thank you so much for being with us.
My privilege.
God bless you.
Honored.
And we are so happy to see you alive and well.
If I don't see you here, I'll see you there.
We'll see you. Okay.
It's fascinating, isn't it? Now, when you look at a story like that with this guy, Don Piper, and that book's still available, by the way, either he's a liar, or he had a weird dream, or he's mad, or he's telling the truth. That's the options, really, isn't it? A few interesting things about that make me believe him. There were non-Christian medical witnesses. In fact, 4 paramedics, not 1, pronounced him dead. That's quite interesting to me. It's possible, but unlikely, I think, that 1 paramedic could get it wrong, but almost impossible, I would suggest, that 4 medical staff could do so. So I would suggest that there's pretty compelling evidence that he did actually die. But he is obviously now alive. His story, I would say, is also compelling, and so it speaks to us of God's love and of a God who wants us to turn back to him and to book our place in heaven. But the further point is that he's not alone. There are other testimonies, as he alludes to, like this. And interestingly, most of them experience a visit to heaven, but interestingly, some of them also describe a visit to hell, which is also interesting. But nevertheless, I would suggest to you that the existence of such near-death experiences, if we can call them that, would be another bit of evidence that there is something after death. Another piece of evidence is, of course, the testimony of the Bible. He alluded to this passage, John chapter 14, because Jesus said that he goes to prepare a place for us. I'll just put it up on the screen for us. Most of us know this passage well. I'll just read it fairly quickly in case there's anyone here who isn't familiar with it. This is what Jesus said. Do not let your hearts be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. My Father's house has many rooms. If that were not so, would I have told you that I am going there to prepare a place for you? And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come back and take you to be with me, that you also may be where I am. You know the way to the place where I am going. And then Thomas, the disciple, said to him, Lord, we don't know where you are going, so how can we know the way? And Jesus answered, as we know, we're very familiar with this, Jesus answered, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. So just to quickly sort of make sure we get the main points of that, Jesus says that in his Father's house there are many rooms. So he talks about his Father's house. I think we'd agree he's talking about heaven. And I find it interesting that he says that there are many rooms there. Room for you, room for me. He then says that he's talking to his disciples, I'm going there to prepare a place for you. That's quite something, isn't it? Has it ever occurred to you that Jesus might prepare a place, a room for you in heaven? It's a wonderful thing to reflect upon. And then he says, I will come back and take you to be with me, that you also may be where I am. He can take us there. That's really something to reflect upon, isn't it? And he says, of course, famously, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And it is worth remembering that he says, but no one else is. And I think we do well to reflect upon that. So to summarise what I think we're saying today, it's very clear in the Bible that Jesus says that there is life after death and that he can take us there, that only, in fact, he can take us there. So I think when we sum things up, I think we've looked at a number of things there. I'm just going to sum them up just to make sure that we've got what I was trying to say to you, and I hope it's been helpful. Firstly, we said that science, rationalism, is not enough to satisfy our deepest needs. That verse, that God has written eternity on our hearts. Secondly, we say that people have an inner sense that there's more to life than this. And I think that's what we see when people are seeking spiritual answers all over the place. I think that death and loss make life without the hope of heaven almost unbearable for many people. And I think that is something for us to reflect upon. I think life without the expectation of an afterlife is difficult to cope with. That's what we've also said. We've also said that morality, art, and other human qualities strongly suggest that we are more than just clever animals, and they speak of a deeper truth. So I've done two together there. We also said that all religions speak of an afterlife, and that near-death experiences like that one with Don Piper support the belief that there is something after death, and of course that the Bible is very clear that there is life after death. So when you add all that up, there's a lot of things that support us in the belief that death is not the end. They don't prove it. I never want to lie to you. None of these things prove it. But when you add those things up together, I think we have good reason, logical reasons for believers, Christians, that death is not the end and that there is a wonderful future waiting for us. So I think the conclusion of all that is this. Life without God and an afterlife is empty, meaningless, and hopeless. So I would say to everyone here, if you haven't done so already, turn to God. Acknowledge him. And do that now in this life before you meet with him. Death is not the end. There is a wonderful future that Jesus has prepared for those who trust in him. Lastly, I just wanted to say that next week we are going to continue our big questions. And the question we're going to look at next week is this one. Are there any logical arguments that prove, or at least support, belief in God? Because again, I think that's worth reflecting upon. So I hope that this evening has been of interest to you and has helped you to answer some questions, and we'll look at that next week. Does anybody have any questions about what we've talked about tonight? I can't believe I've answered all your questions. Anne?
It's not a question so much as it's interesting what you were saying about people who say they aren't, they don't believe, they have no faith. I went to my uncle's funeral. He was 100. Yeah. And my cousins all said it is not going to be a religious funeral. And it wasn't until we all said the Lord's Prayer at the end. And I thought, well, that's odd.
Yeah, it is.
Why are we saying the Lord's Prayer when they blatantly don't believe or have a faith? So is that, my brother said they're just covering all bases.
Well, he might be right, but I think it does make the point about, I still remember that humanist funeral, where, he kept alluding to she's in a better place and things. Well, if a real humanist surely shouldn't believe that. So I think you're right. I think people struggle, particularly when it comes to death and things like that. That's when they're forced to face the reality of the situation. I think I've told you a story when I did Alpha, but I'll repeat it. A friend of mine, Isabelle Rosin, she's French. She was flying home for Christmas to her family who live in the south of France. And she's a very devout Christian. She started chatting to the guy on the plane next to her, and he said, "Oh, I don't believe any of that stuff. There's no God." Anyway, it turned out there was really bad turbulence on that plane. So Isabel started praying. Then she noticed the man beside her who had said there's no God, saying, "God, please help me, God, please help me, God, please help me." Seriously, it was just like when the threat to life came, suddenly all his bravado. And I think sometimes people pretend that they don't believe because, life maybe they think is easier that way. But if he really didn't believe, then surely when he thought his life was threatened, it wasn't, but you get the point, he wouldn't be saying, "God, please help me, God, please help me," would he? It's really interesting. And I think, for us who do believe, don't worry about when people just say that. Just keep loving them, keep gently witnessing to them, keep speaking to them about Jesus, because you'll be surprised how much people are listening and are hungry, as I think that wonderful verse from Ecclesiastes says, God has written eternity on people's hearts. And they need something. So yeah, I think that's right. Thank you. Anybody else? Somebody else over here had a hand up, I think.
No,
okay, thank you. My wife's always the worst at asking me questions.
If you have somebody that is dying and they don't have a faith, but they're scared, would they be accepted if at the very last moment they cried out, "God"?
100%, that's the thief on the cross. And that's my mum, as you know. Those of you who don't know, my mum was not a believer. And she died, 30 odd years ago now, age 56 of cancer. And I had the privilege of going to see her right at the end of her life. And I walked into the hospital and she said, "You've got something to tell me." And so I had the difficult but wonderful task of just saying, "Look, Mum, and I'd had a dream, by the way, of her grabbing hold of a lifebelt. Like the lifebelts I've thrown off a boat off the coast. And I said, "Mum, Jesus is that lifebelt. Just grab hold of him." And she said a prayer, said she was grabbing hold of that lifebelt. And then, the next day she was unconscious. But at the very last moment of her life, thanks be to God, this woman who had sort of mocked Christianity throughout my Christian life, put her trust in Jesus. So absolutely. And that thief on the cross is really something for us to remember. Because he was hanging on that cross, he looked at Jesus, said, "Lord, remember me when you come into your kingdom." He didn't understand the Trinity, didn't know the creeds, didn't know any Christian hymns, but he knew that Jesus was the one who could take him home. Faith, that's why Jesus says you need faith as small as a mustard seed. That's all they need. So pray for them and ask God just that in that last moment that they'll just reach out to Jesus and say, "Take me home." That's all that is needed. So yeah, absolutely.
It's wanting to believe,
I don't, it's impossible to answer that because I don't know quite where does wanting to believe become believe. I think there has to be a belief, but it only needs to be a mustard seed of belief.
At funerals, it's quite common to hear people say, "Oh, he or she is looking down on us now."
That's right.
They're more likely to say it outdoors than they are indoors.
Okay, that's interesting.
But all of them think of the afterlife as being them themselves as they know it.
Yes.
I mean, they came into this world as a single cell, so microscopic, you couldn't even see it.
Yeah.
But they don't really think we might go out and be in a different form, perhaps more similar to the way we came in.
Yeah. Well, Don Piper was quite interesting. I mean, it's not quite what you're saying, but he was saying that people were transformed into sort of the perfect version of themselves, wasn't he? His grandfather had lost his fingers in a machinery, had his fingers back. His great-grandmother had her teeth back, so they became everything that God made them to be.
Because we can't think of how we might be. We can't think of another form.
Yeah. I'm going to be slim in heaven. I want you all to know that. I'm going to be slim.
So this is perhaps part of what we can't quite manage, take that extra step.
Jonathan.
Near-death experiences like the one illustrated here has recently been a bit of a hobby of mine. And I must have listened to probably 36 different versions involving people of faith and people of no faith. And I think the most instructive one for me, if I can spend a minute describing it, was a man who was abused as a child by both his father and mother. He grew up into a very intelligent man. He was a professor, a lecturer at some Ivy League college in America, but he wasn't a pleasant human being. He was in holiday in France, and he had something happen to him, and he had hours to live. And the French bureaucracy basically couldn't help him, being an American. So technically he died, and his out-of-body experience he described as him being led by these shadowy figures into a different dimension that he couldn't understand or didn't recognize. And it turned out to be he was heading towards hell. And at the last minute, these demons were apparently attacking him. But there was a voice in his head said, "Pray to God." Well, he'd mocked God all his life. He wasn't a believer at all. He was a confirmed atheist. And he couldn't think of a prayer. I don't know how to pray. And then he remembered a hymn at school as a boy. And he just started blurting out these words fairly incoherently, because obviously a distant memory. And every time he did that, his situation improved. And he came back to life. And the doctors don't know how he came back to life. And obviously he's now converted. He's trying to convert his family. Yeah. That's the most extreme example I've heard, where technically he was already dead and descending into hell and was saved.
Yeah. Well, God is reaching out to people. It's an amazing thing. So thank you so much for that, Jonathan. Pat, I think you wanted to say something?
Yes, I was just thinking that you might know where it says in the Bible something about a husband and a wife. If a husband does not have faith and a wife does.
Yes, it's Paul. I think it's 1 Corinthians, but I can't give you a verse, I'm afraid. Yeah.
But there's some hope for that other half of a couple.
Yes, there is. You're right. Yeah. You're right. There is. Yeah.
Actually, I was like that because I was 67, and I was really keen to learn to know about God, because it had been part of my life in a way for so many years. And both I and my wife wanted me to find faith. I then found faith, as you know, because the Holy Spirit came. So I now know why we're here, what it's all about, which is a great relief. You're not worrying anymore about why and what you're doing.
Yes.
But at the end of the day, I just think I just have hope. And I know you don't like the word. I have hope in God's word that we go to heaven. If we don't, we're never going to know about it. So, but that's what I truly believe that we will now. Yeah. But it's my belief is getting that close. But it's still just a little ditty bit that says.
Well, I think we can have more than hope's a wonderful word if it's used in the right way. Jesus promised, "In my Father's house there are many rooms. If that were not so, would I have told you that I'm going there to prepare a place for you? And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will take you to be with me so that you may be where I am." So what I'd say to you and to everybody is believe the promises of Jesus. He's not a liar. He's not a liar. So I love you and I respect you, you know that. But I think, just think upon what Jesus said. He's not a liar. Trust him. And I think it's a wonderful thing. Speaking for myself as a Christian, I just thank God that, and I don't say this at all in an arrogant way because it's all by grace, but I don't fear death. When death comes, we can be at peace, can't we? It's not the dying might not be nice, I get that bit. But actually we know that we're going to be with the Lord. And that's such a wonderful thing. It's what Paul meant when he said, death, where is your sting? Where is your victory? We have nothing to worry about it, because we know where we are going. And I think that is such a blessing and a privilege for us as Christians. So, hold on to that. And as I say, remember those words of Jesus, John 14, 1-6, if you want to read them again when you get home. As clear as he could be, isn't it? As clear as he could be. So I would say that. Hold on to that. And believe Jesus. He said it. He's not a liar. Yeah. Anybody else?
There is something that quite a lot of people would say, I believe, help me with my unbelief, my lack of belief, whatever. There's always those questions we just can't get our head round.
But again, I hear you totally, and you're right. Somebody said that to Jesus, by the way, didn't they, when they came to him. And it's actually a verse, I think, that helps us. But to me, it's another version of just a mustard seed of faith is all you need. Just a mustard seed. That thief on the cross had a mustard seed of faith. Didn't know that Jesus was the Son of God. Didn't know any of the creeds. Didn't understand the Trinity. But he had enough faith to say, Jesus, take me with you. And Jesus said, today you'll be with me in paradise. It's a wonderful thing for us to hold on to.
Just wondered whether you'd say that nowadays it's quite unfashionable to be Christian, or whether things are turning and changing. I mean, you need courage to say you're a Christian in some situations.
You're right, but I think you're absolutely right. I think it is unfashionable, but it was unfashionable in the early centuries for the Christians. So I think I don't mean this at all rudely. We can't moan, and let's not forget, of course, our brothers and sisters in North Africa and so many other places for whom being a Christian is putting your life on the line. So I don't think we have a great burden to bear, but it is unfashionable.
But in our society in England...
Yeah. Oh, you're absolutely right. You're right. But I think we need to be bolder, if I'm being honest with you, Pat. I think we need to be bolder. I think we let that cow us as Christians too much. I think we need to remember that what I've been trying to say tonight, I hope well enough, but if not, forgive me, is that actually, even those people who say, I think it's a load of rubbish, there's still a bit of them that are hoping that it's true. And I think we need to hold on to that, love them, and keep just saying, Jesus said, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. That's the truth. Just keep saying it to them. They might throw it back in your face, but you never know what... See, when I became a Christian, I was about early 20s, as most of you know. I still remember my girlfriend at the time, this girl Rachel, and her parents talking to me about Christianity, and I sort of said, oh, rubbish, I don't believe it. But somehow it was still sticking. Do you see what I'm saying? Something in it was speaking to me. And then, as you know, this girl Rachel's mum gave me this book of Bible verses, and sometimes I would look at it, because so even when people throw it back at you, don't let that cow you or make you afraid. Keep being bold, or even be bolder. I think we need to be bolder. Jonathan?
I hope there's source for hope in what you say. There seems to be younger people, a lot younger than me. I've been told more and more by social commentators that one of the most important qualities for young people is authenticity.
Yeah.
As we develop technologies that are often there to deceive us in practice, I can't help thinking that authenticity will become an ever more prized commodity in everyday life. And that's why I have cause for hope that authentic religion, authentic faith, delivered with love, has a future.
Yeah, thank you. I think you're bang on. I think it doesn't mean being perfect, by the way. Authenticity isn't I'm perfect, so people look at my life and say, oh, Luke's so perfect, I'll believe in it. Authenticity is I will love you, and I'll be honest about my weaknesses, but I'll tell you that the amazing thing is that God has loved me and has forgiven me. And when they can see that I still love them still, walk my talk as best I can, that's authenticity. So the only danger of talk about authenticity, which is why I'm saying it, is sometimes we can think it means you've got to be perfect. That's what I'm saying, not very clear. You don't have to be perfect. But authenticity is primarily about loving people. But also, you then got to speak. We do have to speak, and I think in this country we need to get better at that. Saying what we believe.
Yeah, I meant often people who present themselves with their flaws.
Yeah.
And they don't try to hide them.
That's right. Yeah. Anybody else got any questions or comments? Thank you, Rachel.
I was wondering if it was okay if I read 1 Thessalonians 4.
Sure.
This was a reading that was in my Bible notes on the day that my mother-in-law died. And it says, reading from verse 13, "Brothers and sisters, we do not want you to be uninformed about those who sleep in death, so that you do not grieve like the rest of mankind, who have no hope. For we believe that Jesus died and rose again, and so we believe that God will bring with Jesus those who have fallen asleep in him. According to the Lord's word, we tell you that we who are still alive, who are left until the coming of the Lord, will certainly not precede those who have fallen asleep. For the Lord himself will come down from heaven with a loud command, with the voice of the archangel, and with the trumpet call of God, and the dead in Christ will rise first. After that, we who are still alive and are left will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. And so we will be with the Lord forever. Therefore encourage one another with these words."
I was just waiting for that last line, which I know. I love that. Encourage one another with these words. That's wonderful, isn't it? That's the truth that we have as Christians, that we can be confident, we can know that for us, death is the gateway to a heavenly, eternal blessing in the presence of God. I think that's a great way for us to end. Thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate you guys coming, particularly when it's so cold. There'll be tea, coffee, wine if you'd like it. You might just want to get home and get warm. But thank you again so much for being here. Thank you.